who can take minutes. Let's see here. Wes, can I hit you up for that?
Didn't he already do that?
Yeah, I'm one of the most reasonable.
That's the problem with being reasonable.
Who was supposed to be the minute taker?
It was supposed to be Rich Sauls, but I think he might be tied up for the moment. Or actually, maybe I'll hit up Rob. Rob Wilton, do you mind taking some minutes for us?
I can only do it for about half an hour because then I've got to drop for another meeting. So I don't mind doing it for the first half hour if that's possible.
I can do the second half. That works.
All right, thank you very much. And hopefully Rich will... Oh, Rich is here?
I see him in the participant list.
Oh, hey, Rich. Rich volunteered, so I think everybody's off the hook. I think Rich agreed, so we'll thank Rich, and we will begin the meeting because it is now at that time. First of all, thanks everybody for showing up to the RFC Editor Future Development Program. Brian and I are your hosts. Mr. Peter St. Andre is our editor. Our program leads are Jared and Wes, as you can see if you go to the web page for the program. We are in the final stretch, which is why you see this wonderfully animated GIF here. I don't know if we'll finish everything today. Brian and I have been talking. We think if we can, great. If we can finish stuff on list, great. Otherwise, it is distinctly possible that we might need one more interim, but we're really hoping not. We'll see by the end of the meeting. So for that to happen, we're asking everybody to keep their comments brief. But obviously, if you feel you need to make a comment, please do. As we've been doing this the last few times, Brian will be managing the queue in terms of who's talking, we'll be going to GitHub for specific issues when we need to, and that's where we keep our issues list. So without further ado, the note well we have used to apply here. I think everybody has been seeing the extended note wells in various meetings. I want to stress that our anti-harassment procedures are part of this list, and when we say really note well, we are asking everybody to put their best foot forward. This is a contentious discussion. People can get heated. Just remember that everybody here is working in the best interest of the internet. I see, Wes, you have a question, please, or a comment.
I don't see Rich logged into the editor, so it would be good to verify that he is actually here. Otherwise, Rob and I can take over, or maybe he's taking notes somewhere else. But Rich, there you are.
Yeah, taking notes in the link that posted in chat. Assume I got the right one.
Okay.
Three people online and the one that's posted in the agenda, the headshot doc. Are we in two different note sections again?
Okay.
Rich?
Just use let's use the one that Rich is using, just because he started that, and that just make sure that people follow through, and if you guys can communicate out of band to proceed. Sam. Sam, do you have a question or comment? Okay.
Ask it, Kevin.
Okay. All right. So here we are at Note Well, and I think we can all say that we have noted well. Our agenda, we have noted well. We propose to do very quick bits of bashing. I want to just go over the timeline very quickly. It's changed ever so slightly. I don't propose to take any comments on it because the rest of the timeline is likely to be based on how we do in this meeting, and then it's up to the IAB from there. We are offering the Q&A from the community because we put out a note saying that we would take Q&A in this meeting from the community. For people who have not been participating, we're not going to take a lot of that because we want to try and get through the issues, but we invite anybody to ask questions on list at any time, or you can ask the chairs if you want background. Feel free to contact us in any way. Then we'll get right into issues. We're going to do that for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to be done. Any questions about the agenda? Okay. So this is an update of the slide from last time. The times have shifted a little bit. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. The good news is that the draft Carpenter RFC IAB charter was dispatched. At least I believe it was dispatched, and so was the 2026 update that Brian did. That was also dispatched. Lars has agreed that he would take that on. In other words, obviously all that has to be confirmed on the mailing lists, but it all sort of looks good. We are hoping, assuming, so we will absolutely need a new version of the draft. Peter and Brian and I will be going through the results of this meeting as well as the editorials early next week, and hopefully we'll get a draft out shortly thereafter. Then we're hoping, and this is sort of a finger in the wind, just sort of guess as to when the IAB can begin this. They have a process that's governed by RFC 4845 that starts the broader community review. And then at the same time, we hope that the other documents can be developed. Hopefully based on any comments received from community review, if you have to make some changes, make some changes, but otherwise allow for the IAB to do its approval by the end of January. And then we still begin formation of the RSAB and RSWG shortly thereafter. And the IESG will have to do the approval of the two documents that got dispatched, as well as I think Rich also has a document that is covered for 2028 BIS, which is also being worked on. So then that's sort of where we're hoping, but all of this assumes no more substantial issues, and further that we're able to resolve what substantial issues that we have. If you have comments about this, this is just mostly a finger in the wind, but sort of where I expect things to go. I'd like not to discuss that now, but rather, if you have issues with this, please just take it to the list. Again, most of this is prognostication, not something that is in any way normative. Okay. Moving on. This is really a little bit of time set aside as a priority for those people who haven't been participating. If you have read the draft in particular and you have questions, please, if informational questions in particular, please, if you would, join the queue and see if, and we'll see if we can get some questions answered. And if people do not join the queue in about 30 seconds, then we'll just press on to issues. And if we have time at the end, we can take more questions then. Because that just means more time to allow us to process through issues, which is fine because I think we're all racing towards that finish line at this point. All right. Barring, obviously the community is going to get a formal opportunity to raise questions when we go through the community review, the IAB process. So there's still time for things to come up. And there has been time. Our program last call just completed. I want to thank everybody who contributed, and a lot of people did contribute. One might say, well, sadly, we have a lot of issues to get through. But the good news is we've been able to bucket those, and maybe we can move forward with a certain amount of alacrity. Now, when I say alacrity, though, anybody is invited to join the queue and say, hey, wait a minute, I have a comment about this issue. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put forward the stack of slides that we have, show how we bucketed things, and then we'll step through each of those slides individually. And if you have questions or comments, please feel free to provide your views. Okay, so now I have to get this on. So this, I'm going to try and make it bigger on my side so people can see a little better on their side. Whoa. Let me just see if I do this. Does it even help more? Let's see here. These are a bit of an eye chart. I apologize for that. I'm just going to see if I can zoom this a bit more. Is that better? Let's hope that it is. So
Why don't you just get
the
it
first,
presentation mode?
yeah.
Presentation, that'll take.
If I throw it into presentation mode, I sort of lose other views, but let's try that, see if that works better. Can people see the presentation mode, or are they seeing the other mode? Oops, sorry. So these are the buckets.
If you uploaded the slides and converted them, you can actually use the other button there, which is not sharing your screen, but sharing the slides directly. That makes it much easier for you.
Well, I think for the moment, let's just go with this. Just
Okay.
I think everybody can see.
Yeah.
The first are mostly editorial issues. I'm going to come back to this slide. You can see we have a good number of them, and I'll explain each of these issues briefly. The second is where I think we have agreement. And there's a good number of issues here. I mean, look at this nice stack of issues where I think we do have agreement. Of course, obviously my assumption here is that we'll accept these. But of course, if you disagree, we'll spend a little more time. Then we have things where we didn't hear a lot of support. I want to spend a little more time on this to give those people who raise these issues the opportunity to speak if they'd like to do so, but I'd like them again to be brief. And then there were some areas where we clearly have to have a bit more discussion. Excuse me. The first issues are 93 and 94, which were proposed by Martin. Thank you for staying up late, Martin, to engage in the discussion. One is about appeals against RSAB decisions. In one case, we've said really it's process only, but maybe we need to vary that slightly. We'll get into the more detail there. And another, it's about how resolutions happen when they're in a timely manner. It's a bit of a tweak of the text, and we'll go through that. We've seen a lot of discussions about statements and about also, who controls the website and things like that. That's really issue 117. And then there's the who controls the last call. So those are sort of the big ones that I think we need to spend a little more time on. So those are the grouped issues. And I'd like now to back up to this and just ask. So let me step through each of these and I'll talk to them. You can follow along in GitHub in terms of the issue number to see the exact edits. And let's start. I'm sorry?
No.
Okay. Okay, so in issue number 106, Miria has proposed a more concise statement for the beginning of the abstract. That I think it's something like this specifies the version 3 of the RFC editor model. In these editorial issues, I propose that on the whole you trust that Peter will take your concerns into account. And so long as we're not modifying normative intent of the process that we've gone through over the last 18 months, trust that he will do the right thing in terms of being concise and things like that, and using the language where appropriate. And if you see something you don't like when the update comes out, of course you could say something. So then the other issue that I think Miria raised was what are the actual updates to certain other RFCs, and Miria was very specific. Be a little more clear on what has changed, and usually we do mention particularly when there are updates, we do mention it's become a bit of a tradition to at least mention that either in the abstract, but more likely in the beginning of in the introduction somewhere, to say here's what has changed at the highest level. Not in great detail, but at the highest level, usually the words are put in the introduction. There is a bit of discussion now around consistency around how selection committees are formed. The initial proposals was just to make this language the same, but just as we were getting ready for this meeting, I saw a note from Jay saying, wait a minute, I think these two should be separate. So I'd like us to let's pile this one back into the discuss column, and let's come back to issue number 111 a little bit later. The RPC SOW, this was just slight editing of how that issue should be dealt with. Then issue 121. This is just a header change at this point. Initially, this wasn't an editorial issue. It was Miria saying, well, we haven't really addressed incoming, but we actually did in one of the interims decide to not address outgoing. I'm sorry, we haven't addressed outgoing outreach, and we decided in one of the interims that we weren't going to do that. But the title of the section needs to change. Issue number 122 is a slight wording change to which I viewed as editorial, which just is to refer to the RPC as being as contractually overseen. Then issue number 124 is minor tweak to cover legacy editor RFC editor document. That's to say that you can still use the RFC editor documents that we had before still apply unless we have specifically said that they don't, right? And that they can then be updated later if needs be. And Mike provided some good wording along these lines. And that's just for continuity's sake. 126, this is another one which was point in time RPC responsibilities, and literally it says something like as of, now or something like that, and there's wording again there. Then issue number 130 was from Ecker, and this was, we really do want to be normative about this. I think he's probably correct. And then, so we're leaving it to Peter to say chooses or shall choose, and then in the discussion it came out, and this is a little bit of a discussion, do we need references to the appropriate normative language RFCs, 2119, 8174. And I think since we are using shall all over the place, it seems to me like it doesn't hurt to do so. But again, I would just leave that to Peter to decide unless somebody has a really strong opinion about it. Then also Ecker pointed out, really we should be more normally referencing 2418 rather than 7282 in terms of process management. Ecker's particular concern is that 7282 is an informational document versus 2418, which is really the normative way in which we manage working groups. And then finally, Ecker helped us be concise. A member of community is a person, so we could just use that phrase. And so these I'm going to suggest to Peter, please take these into account and use best judgment. But before we move off of any of these issues, I'd like to open the floor if anybody has concerns about these resolutions. Okay. If you find that you do later, obviously we always confirm things in email. Please feel free to say, wait a minute, I'd like us to review this a little bit more. All right, then we have issues that we should accept. One of them, it was really an editorial. I put it in the wrong column. This is just add a reference to draft Carpenter. That's actually in the working copy already. And then, so here I am expecting at least some people to say, to ask questions. If you have questions, so please do feel free. And I do want to share at least a little bit of GitHub language here and there when it's appropriate. Jay made a proposal to allow for a temporary RSCE to be appointed, and I gave some examples about why that might be appropriate at different times. My proposal, I didn't hear any objections, and I think Martin, I think you asked a question or two about it. I didn't see any further concerns. If people have concerns about that language, please feel free to say so. Let's see here. RPC responsibilities, missing a couple of responsibilities, and Jay elaborated those, and those are specified, and they're not in particular. I didn't see any concerns raised on the list about that. Seem to have some support. The earlier deck of this slide said I didn't see a lot of support to remove the word ultimate, and then everybody came back to me and said, "Oh yes, you do." So we should remove the word ultimate when it comes to ultimate authority of the LLC. Issue number 109 was if we're going to hard code RFC interest, maybe we need a slight wording tweak, which Brian Carpenter then proposed, which was RFC interest or the equivalent. If people would like to make other changes, please feel free. This is a simpler process for certain changes. Let's go to, so 114 and 117 and 128 are all sort of wrapped up in one. And I'm going to go to the text for that in a minute. And I'll go to the text for heritage. This is an issue raised by Stephen Farrell. So let's go to 114, just a moment. I'm going to share a different, I'm going to share, hang on a second here. Let's find the sharing button again. And now we're just going to share my whole screen. Let's try this. Okay, and now I see I shared this. This is screen 1. I think I need to share screen 2. Yes, okay. Allow. Okay, now this is issue 114, right, which was raised by John Clanson. And so in this, we are talking about several different things. And between issues 114, 117, and 128, we're talking about 3 things. Thing number 1 is whether the RSCE had to wait to be asked a question. And so this would be the equivalent of saying, well, you know, there's a train coming down the tunnel, but the RSCE couldn't warn us. And I don't think that was our intent. And the proposed edits for that text are to basically say, well, the RSCE can, of course, advise us if they see a train coming down the tunnel. And the actual specific change for that can be found in issue 128. And then, so this other issue, this issue in 117 has to do with who controls the website. There's actually no text here yet for that, and we'll talk about that in issue 117. The text here, the only except issue here was for the RSCE text, which it turns out it was in 128. And we'll come back to this when we get to 117. Then, just a moment. Issue 119. So Stephen and others raised concerns about the heritage and whether that should be taken into account in terms of how the RSWG and RSAP do their deliberations. And in the discussion, I think what we found was that the word heritage became a very difficult term to use. And so I proposed some text which is around this, which says that rather than using the term heritage, but simply to add in addition to what was there, which this part was here already, this is the addition, which was proposed really.
Is readable? Like I can't read this.
Mike,
Okay, hang on a second. Let me just make it bigger. Is that better? Oops, that's a little too big.
Mike is in the queue.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead, Mike.
Yeah, as I said, I owe text for this on the principal stuff. This is sort of a reasonable amount of motherhood, but I don't think it captures what Stephen had in mind, nor for that matter what I had in mind. Basically, I'm looking at something to cover availability, accessibility, publication language, commonality of purpose, diversity of interest, breadth of expression, archival quality, and world-class professional publication as sort of the base principles on where we're building from going forward. the things that we don't want to throw out with the bathwater, if you will. Some of this was expressed in Bob's last report on the RFC series. Some of it has been, well understood, if not expressed in text, or has been, babbled about in various conversations. I'm sorry for the delay. It's just, taking time to get things written or steal the right text.
Becker.
I'd really be happy to see some text here, but the way Mike first phrased that is not something that I'm excited about seeing. I think that a number of those points are contested, and that the text here, I believe, has in fact is almost too much, but has the right sort of everybody can form their own opinion about what is good and what is bad. But I don't want to spend the next 3 months fighting about all the words Mike just said, which I think are in fact, many of those words have been the subject of precisely the debates that led to the situation we're in now. So,
Okay, Christian.
Excuse me.
I'm with Ika on this one. There are principles that have assured the success of the series, but unless we can point to an existing document, something that was written by John Postel some time ago or something like that, then I don't think that we should take on the task of actually making an inventory and a list of those principles and defining what they are in this document. If only for practical reason. If we try doing that, we're going to spend another 3 months arguing between ourselves, and we don't need that.
Mike?
Yeah, the problem with that is John didn't feel the need to write the stuff down because it was sort of common mindset of everybody at the time that this is the way things were going to go. Now, I'm sure we could probably grab John Clemson, Steve Crocker, Bob Hinden, Scott Bradner, and say, okay, what was in John's mind, and get a pretty good idea of that. But then you would be basically saying, well, that's your opinion. I think there's things here that we need to basically capture, and I think it's important that for example, does the RSWG get to change the language of the series from English to something else?
So, Mike, let me ask a question to you. Is this a guardrail that you feel strongly needs to be in this document, or is this something that the RSWG itself could take up? And if it went into this document, one reasonable question to ask is, why couldn't the RSWG change it?
No, this is one of the things here is to put the language in that basically says that these are things that require going outside the comfort zone of the RSWG and the RSAB back to the original delegators, to the IAB, IESG, and LLC, to say, we want to change this. The guardrails were put in place in meta language, and yeah, we don't want, and everybody here wants to change something, and I have the suspicion we're going to be arguing about this for a while.
Okay.
I look at it this way. We have spent a long time trying to get to the point of constraining the RSWG to a particular set of things, and it keeps getting expanded again. I really prefer that we lock them in their box of writing documents and say something about what those documents are, as opposed to just sort of saying, no, we're going to lock you in the box, and then you can write a document that unlocks the box and lets yourself out again after we've spent a year and a half or 2 years at this. Not a lot of fun.
Okay.
Peter.
I think before we go further, I just want to ask the questions. Are there those who agree with Mike on this point? If we could hear from those people. Otherwise, I'd like to hear from others who agree from Mike on the list, because we need to have some more support for that view, I think, at this point. But if you're in the queue to support Mike, please remain in the queue. If not, I'd like to hear from others who would support Mike on that.
Peter.
Yeah, I did include text from 8728 and 8729, which, you know, are approved RFCs and all that, addresses some of the principles, and those principles are expressed in those RFCs about the RFC editor function and so on. So personally, with my editor hat on, I think that's enough for now. And things that are coming from elsewhere, or you know, a process whereby we interview folks who were there with John Postel and things like that, I don't think that's a good idea at this point. If we want to take on some document about principles of the RFC series, once the RSWG is set up, that's fine, and that group can decide to take that on as a working group item. Thanks.
Eric. Oh no, Joel. Sorry, Joel. Joel, are you gonna speak?
Didn't hear the request because I came in when my system was just temporarily dropping audio. Sorry. I philosophically agree with Mike. I don't know that I will agree with all of the things he writes down, but I think that it is important that we actually go through the argument as to what principles we think are important to have as base things that the RSWG just doesn't get to just change by itself. And maybe probably it's a smaller set than I would like, but if it is an empty set, then most of the work we've done has probably been a waste of time. So I philosophically agree with Mike, and I think we need to put some effort into it. I do not want it to become an unending effort, and I doubt I will agree with everything Mike writes, but that's this group needs to come to agreement on some of that.
Thanks,
Okay,
Eric.
so Eric, and then we're going to close this issue off for the moment.
I guess I'm a little for ignoring this question about like about like what text should be written down. I guess I don't really understand the premise here, which is you know, one premise you could say is like we're going to decide now and for all time that I don't know, the RFC has to be in English, and nothing ever can ever change that. That'd be one thing we could say. But the other thing we could say is no, we're going to decide that you know the RFC has to be in English, and what Mike seems to be saying is the RSWG can't change that, but there's some other process which can. And I guess I'd like to understand what the nature of that process is, because it seems to me the nature of that process is going to be sign off from the IESG and the IAB and some sort of survey of the community, which is more or less essentially the process through which like things that go through the RSWG actually get approved, which is to say that they have to be signed off by the RSWG, which has to go through the community, and has to be signed off by the RSAB, which is constituted by people who work for the IESG and the IAB. And so like, it seems to be that like that is like I don't understand why we have to have a new process. We seem to have essentially the same moral foundation as the process of going through the RSWG. So like I guess asking this question of you know the you know like what the guardrails of the state. I guess I'd like to understand in what way the sorry, my cat alters opinions. In what way you know what other process we would invent for going outside those guardrails, and what would give that greater democratic legitimacy than the process that we've just invented here.
Okay, I've closed the queue on this issue. Point.
And seems to have closed himself. We'll give him a minute to rejoin. We're going to have to take this up on the list, clearly.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Like everything just blipped for 20 seconds there. Yeah, we closed the queue, so I think what I would propose is if we get a proposal, and I mean very quickly, that can be discussed in brief, and we can see that there is going to be some consensus on it, then I think if we can get more elaborative words that we don't see huge amount of disagreement over, and we get those quickly, I think we could include them. Otherwise, I think there's going to be have to be a lot of support for really making a change at this point. So we'll take this to the list, but the clock is ticking. The issue has to be addressed quickly and in a way that can garner support. And that's my proposal. Okay, so no consensus yet, right? But the clock is ticking, right? Proposals that can garner support quickly are welcome. Okay, so we're going to move on. Let me share my screen again because that blipped out too. That was really weird that it did that. And here we go, allow. All right, so then that was heritage. Then Mike had proposal 125. I'm just going to go to that, which requested a bit more specificity on the individuals that would be addressed in section 4.1. I think I saw that Jay supported this change, and unless there are objections, I would say to allow this to proceed. We haven't had a lot of discussion, but if there are any concerns, just please raise them. Then we have permit RFs. This is issue 128. Permit the RFC not to wait to be consulted, and I'll just flash that here. This is very small changes, right? It just to say remove if requested, and then change this to RFC might provide guidance. And this is in section 5. And Peter, I think you covered one of the two of these in one of your messages. And then Ecker raised the point. Wait a minute. What happens? How can the RSAB decline a proposal, as is discussed in the introduction, which raised a point, which was we didn't actually say what happens if the RSAB if there isn't a success, if the vote fails. And so we should have been a little bit more specific about that. And so I proposed text onto the list, which was this, which is if a vote is taken and the proposal not approved, is returned to the RSWG, and the RSWG can consider making further changes. And the key thing here is can consider. It might be that that maybe the changes are so radical and there's such a disagreement between the RSAB and the RSWG that it won't come of anything, but maybe it will, as Eric pointed out on list. Eric, you want to comment further?
I was going to say this text is fine with me. I guess I was just what I was reacting to was just suggesting there was something other than sending the document back to the list, because I don't understand what that would be, right? Like we have no way of saying, like, there's just no structure for saying, like, we will never consider any document anything like this ever, like, so go away. There's just no structure for that. So like this was not intended to be like a substantive change. It was just like I didn't understand the text, and this changed.
Okay. Okay. Any other concerns? Please do feel free to raise them. Then those are the issues that we would like to accept. The one issue that in this discussion that I think I heard we really need to a little bit more discussion on is 119. We'll take that to the list and see how far we get. The next list of points I want to just go through in a little bit more detail too. Why is this not moving forward? Oh, slide. There we go. All right. So these are the issues that I did not hear support for. Now, the first issue was, I think, from Lars, and was what happens if you have multiple people who've resigned in succession? Should the 3-month timer be reset? And I actually think we heard suggestions going the other direction. No, in fact, we should hard code the 3-month timer to the approval of the docking by the RSWG. And so unless people want to raise support for that, please feel free to comment. And Mike, I see you're in the queue. Let me just ask Lars, maybe if you could speak first, if you don't mind, Mike. Lars was the one who opened this. I'll just ask Lars if you want to elaborate just a little here.
Hi, yeah. So I don't care very deeply about this, but I raised it because maybe I'm a transport guy and I care about timers. But if we don't restart the timer when the second or subsequent position opens up, those bodies will have a potentially very short timeline to fulfill their duties. And so I think the fair thing would be to restart the timer. I see that, you could sort of construct a case where somebody abuses that to sort of leave the body understaffed, but I don't think that's a realistic sort of fear, and we can sort of deal with it with an appeals thing. So that's my reason for mildly preferring that we restart the timer. Thanks.
Okay. Mike, thanks for being patient.
No worries. This interacts with the discussion we were having about who's doing last call. So if the 3-month timer kicks off when the RSWG approves it, that includes the time for the last call on the RSAB side. Okay. And basically it means that if it's restarting every time somebody leaves the RSAB, you could be a year at this. Every time somebody leaves, the thing will restart. May not happen, but that's the worst case. So I would basically tie it to the end of the community last call and 3 months from there, period. Just don't worry about vacancies, say that's the date, and leave it up to the various organizations to meet their requirements.
Okay, let me just turn this around. Does anybody, I just want to ask, do people agree, if there are those who agree with Lars' reasoning, can you please speak up? Colin?
Yeah, so I do agree with Lars' reasoning, and I think in general, I'm concerned that the process seems to be the document seems to be trying to impose constraints to make sure that everything happens on a very strict timeline. And yet my understanding of what this group is doing is that there's nothing here where there are actually likely to be any time constraints. So I don't quite understand why we are so concerned about time limiting difficult cases where there's clearly something gone wrong and we need time to sort out the process. And I think all that's going to end up happening is we'll do what we do with all the timers in the working group process in the IETF, which is in practice ignore them. So I think we're over constraining things by specifying all these time limits.
Okay, Ecker.
Yeah, I largely agree with Colin and Lars. Though I think the timer should be 200 milliseconds. I guess what I would say is also it's not clear to me how the timers meaningfully work. So I mean, say we said this has to be done within within 3 months. And then through some sequence, and like Mike suggests, basically we effectively never have quorum, right? And so we never have a full board. It's the effect is things just can't be approved. I mean, it'd be weird if the effect were that things were automatically approved. And so the effect of things just can't be approved, which is the same as nothing happening at all. So I just don't think this seems like a case which is not likely to happen, which is pretty easy to get out of, and if it does happen, probably something is going severely wrong, and it's not adversarial. And and just needs to be fixed. So I don't think trying to have a rule to manage that situation is as helpful as what would like.
Okay, let me turn this back around then. Does anybody mind us permitting? I know Mike spoke in terms of having this timer be automatic. Are there others at this point who feel like they would be upset if we did restart the timer based on an additional resignation?
That's
Okay.
it.
I'm going to say then that we're going to provisionally accept this one.
Yeah. We'll have to go to the list.
Okay. Obviously go to the list. Okay, then editorial expertise concerns. This is something that John Clenson expressed, and others have expressed it at different times, but I didn't really see anything actionable or proposed changes to move on. So other than maybe the whole model is something that they have concerns about, but there's nothing really here to really take as an action. So unless somebody has suggestions here, I don't see how to address the issue. And I'll just say, does anybody want to speak to this in favor at this moment in terms of having, well, I'll say it actually is something different, which is if you have something very specific, a specific proposal, bring it to the list quickly, or this issue gets closed.
Yeah, I think that's the better way to do it. We don't have specifics. So
Yeah.
if you have a specific, bring it to the list. Otherwise, we'll close it. I think that's the right way to deal with that.
Yeah. Now for issue 115, let me bring that one up. Okay, and this is also another John Clenson issue. I think he had a bit of a concern about lack of accountability. I think, though, again, unless there is a specific textual proposal, I'm going to propose to close this issue. And I didn't see really one. Issue number 116 was different. This, I think, was one that Mark Nottingham raised. And it had to do with, do we need to list the RFCs that get assigned into the RFC, the new editorial stream? And we had discussed this previously. In fact, I had raised this issue previously, and the group decided, no, we're not going to try and do that at this time. Are there those who think that we should? Let me ask that question at this point. If there are those who think that we should, this did come up again recently, and I think it relates to the SVG RFC discussion that we just had on the list today. If people feel strong that we should list the RFCs that the editorial stream owns, please join the queue now and say so. Wes.
Discussion going on in the chat that you might want to read, which is, should we move to issues that in face-to-face time rather than, I'd propose all of these closures go to the list of just saying we're going to close all these unless somebody objects, and instead move to stuff that requires face-to-face time.
I think that's fair. Anybody disagree? We can do that.
Probably should have done that a little while ago. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe so. All right. So let me get to these. So these are the 4 issues, and I know we have very little time, and I apologize for that. These are the 4 issues that I think we need to spend a little bit of time on. We're going to start with issues 93 and 94. I'm going to bring up 93, and Martin, may I invite you to really talk a little bit about this, if that's okay? Assuming you're still awake.
So,
let's see here.
When I went through the section that talked about appeals, it had very clear text on the appeal basis for RSWG decisions. That's pretty crisp and clear. But there was no the parallel structure that also talked about what how the appeals work for the RSAB, but it didn't have the same clear definition for what an appeal could be. And I was looking to provide some guidance on what happened there. And I think consistent with the policies that we have for the working group side of things, we already have agreement that appeals only really happen on the basis of not following the process. And I tried to cover that, but then realized that the RSAB is given sort of this other task, which is to interpret policy and to make decisions that need to be, I guess, timely and expedient. And so I tried to capture that as well. And so that this is just 3 sentences. One, say you can appeal on the basis of not following policy. Another one to say you can appeal on the basis that you believe that their decisions were in contravention of an existing agreed policy. And third, saying no other cases. I realize that
And
Mike didn't like some of the specific word choices, but I think we sorted that out on the list.
Okay. Do people have opinions about this text? First of all, are there those who would support Martin and his concerns? If you would just, please join the queue and say so.
Mike?
Okay, I'm seeing something from Peter. Okay, and okay, so we have a couple of people who do support, and Mike. Go ahead, if you'd like to add.
In the wrong point in the queue. There doesn't need to be text about the appeal. The question is, limiting it in the way that is here is kind of weird. Among other things, because like I said in my other text, the RSAB is generally going to be the interpreter of the policy. So explaining how they violated the policy they interpreted is going to be kind of an interesting discussion.
I think the key here, Mike, and just if I may, if I could just add, I think this is, does the IAB get to reinterpret whether the RSAB misinterprets something? That's the question.
It would be difficult for them to do that because do they have the specific domain knowledge of what's been going on at that point? Do you need, I don't know.
If I may, I think what I saw from Martin's proposal was that there's two things that we're asking the RSAB to do. One is to approve documents that come out of the working group. The other is in cases where it's unclear that whether there's an existing policy or whether there's a gap in policies, and the authors and the RPC and other interested parties are trying to work things out. I think Martin's right. We need to make someone responsible for coming to a resolution of that. And so his proposal was that the RSAB ought to be the ones who are on the hook to make sure that those things get resolved. And if the thing gets resolved in a way that it ought to be appealable, what RSAB action was taken, because they might have ignored the fact or missed the fact that there actually was a policy that covered this instance. And so I think that's what I got from Martin, and I think it does make sense to have something along those lines, because this is something that the RSAB ought to be responsible for, and there's got to be some sort of process to hold them responsible. Thanks.
There's one other thing that I might add here, which is that when there is no policy and the RSAB makes a decision, that's not appealable at that point. So we're giving them that much rope, and they're allowed to make those decisions on their own authority.
Okay, Mike, and I'm sorry, Peter, you still in the queue, or
I'm coming out.
It's Mike. Okay.
Yeah.
Mike, and then we'll close the queue. I'm going to take this back to the list. Okay.
Yeah, I think I keep looking at this, and there's a chicken and egg problem here, because the policies are written editorial stream documents that have already been published. Okay, not the document that's coming through the RSAB at the time that's being evaluated. So you could point to a previous editorial stream document and say, okay, that says we have to publish this, and that would be the appealable thing. But the document itself, if it's trying to bootstrap its policy, the RSAB can say no. And I think that's the right answer.
Okay, I think this one has to go back to the list for a bit more detail. So no consensus. Back to the list for now. And I think probably the best thing to do is to get into more the source of the issue at first before we start formulating language. This really didn't get enough discussion on list, and I'd like to see some more. issue 94 is also Martin's. This one's hopefully a much simpler issue. What it basically said was when there is a disagreement, a policy disagreement, before it rather than just say that the parties can resolve the disagreement, that the responsibility lies with RSAB, and this is when you have an inter-stream dispute. So the change that's being proposed here is this. Are there any concerns with this change? Let me just ask that. This is almost it's not quite editorial because it does shift the responsibility to RSAB. Does anybody have a concern about this change?
So someone raised a concern about the time order that this implies, and I think that we can just fix that editorially.
Yeah, I just sent something to the list that is text, so we can talk about that there.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Then we're going to proceed.
Yeah, it is a timing issue.
Sorry. Yeah, please close your mic if you're done speaking. Okay. So I think we have 117. We've had a lot of discussion on the list around whether the RSWG can make statements or not. This will be the last issue we cover today because we're going to run out of time. And I'd just like people to provide some comments as to how they'd like to see this issue resolved. I will make two comments. The first is, it seems to me that the overhead of statements or what have you is really in the finding of consensus and not so much in the bits. But that's Elliot's personal opinion. Actually, I'll just leave it at that and just ask people to comment about where they see the right resolution here in terms of proposals. Joel.
It's very clear the RSWG can send email to anybody it wants. The RSWG chairs can send email to anybody they want. But statements that are binding in the sense of IESG statements are not within the process we've laid out, and I would be very strongly opposed to trying to extend the process to do so. And none of the arguments I have seen for doing so make it I'm sorry, I can't get my head around them.
Okay. And by the way, I'm going to split this issue into two because there's statements and then there's like responsibility discussion that also happened. But on the statements aspect, Miria.
Yeah, I agree to the point that I think the heavy part of the process is getting consensus, right? And if you have consensus, I don't see why you would just issue a statement or an RFC. So I think the working group should really be bounded to writing RFCs. That's their purpose, putting policies into RFCs, getting consensus. So if at all any kind of statements are needed, then maybe it's for the RSAB, because the RSAB, as we just said, might resolve conflicts on a more timely basis, and for these kind of conflicts or any kind of issues, they maybe want to write them down somewhere.
Okay, would other people like to comment on this aspect? Mark.
2 minutes.
Yes, it's working. I think it's working. The little graph is moving. Yeah, I think if the statement can become, and not necessarily, as was discussed on the list, there are situations where it might not be good for it to become operative as soon as there's consensus and it goes through the RSAV process. That goes a long way towards addressing this. But keeping in mind that there is still cost in terms of overhead for the authors going through Auth 48. It goes to the RPC. As we all hopefully know, the RPC cost is something on the order of $125 a page. It seems a little silly to publish some of the things that might come out as RFCs, but I'm not going to lie down in the mud about that. I do question, however, why the IAB and the ISG put out non-RFC statements quite often, if this is the attitude of the community.
Let me ask you, Mark. Mark, let me ask you in the group this. Is this something that maybe it's a process refinement that could be addressed in the RSWG and the RSAB itself?
discussion, and some people felt very strongly that the rules cannot be modified by this body, and so I would be concerned about assertions that could be a path out of this.
Okay, Miria, you want the cue again?
You just want to clarify because Mark brought up ISG and IAB statements. So these documents are explicitly not community consensus statements, right? These are statements from the IAB, which is a well-defined set of people, and these are statements from the ISG, which is another well-defined small set of people. So this is not community consensus.
Okay, it is the bottom of the hour here in Switzerland and I think in most places. I apologize that we didn't quite get to the last issue. On the 117, I'm going to say unless there's strong concern, I think the statement aspect is something that we'll leave aside for now. But the other aspect I want to just ask people to take as a homework assignment is to make sure that people are comfortable with the idea that the RSWG can establish processes to address aspects like open source or content management, working, of course, together with the LLC in doing so. We started a little bit of that discussion. I had an exchange with Mark on that. I'd like other people to comment on the list, and if we can close on that, then I think we're very close to being done. We actually made a lot of progress today, believe it or not. We covered most of the issues that were open. You guys were really prolific in terms of and very conscientious in terms of reading the document for clarity, for gaps. It was all really good. So we have a little bit more work to do, but we're really close. So with that, what I'd like to do is just ask for any other business. I think we are out of time. Okay, so Miria, please.
Oh, gone. Okay.
Okay.
I think we're done.
So, Brian, further comments? Any additional comments?
No, we'll have to consider whether we need another interim. It depends on whether we can close these on the list pretty quick. If we can, great. If not, that's what we'll do.
Okay, and then Peter, thanks again for your editorial efforts on this, and please look for, we will do an update very soon to the document. Even if we don't address every last issue, we will still have an update out. And I want to thank again everybody and look for the updates soon. And I'll see you on the list.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Elliot.
And thank you to both chairs for this long process. You guys have done a stellar job. Thanks, Peter.
Take care now.